Hi everyone. There is a major outbreak of a protozoan parasite going on right now in the USA. The clusters of infections are in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, and Kentucky. The CDC has identified over 11,000 cases of domestic cyclosporiasis this season so far. Among them, 4,000 cases are confirmed and over 7,000 others are undergoing further laboratory testing. So here you can see that the outbreak is expanding right now. So the cluster is here in Michigan. Initially, this was linked to a potential source, a lettuce, which has been recalled, but then it was clarified that it was a false positive result. So federal and state authorities are still investigating cases. Here you can see that the outbreak involves these 5 states. However, it's spreading fast and almost 41 states have reported at least one case of cyclosporiasis since May 1st, 2026. The timeline of this outbreak started on May 1st when CDC begins annual Cyclospora surveillance for the domestic season, which starts from May to August. Between late May and early June, sporadic lab confirmed cases were reported across multiple states and epidemiological investigation was started. So then the cases kept rising in multiple states during June. On July 6th, CDC issued health alert confirming 145 cases across 17 states, but the source of outbreak was not confirmed. Between 13 and 14 July, CDC expanded the traceback investigation and suspected that lettuce was linked to the outbreak. In mid-July, Taco Bell removed the shredded iceberg lettuce and Telefarm recalled the implicated product from market. So by July 21st, it became obvious that it is the largest foodborne outbreak linked to Cyclospora with more than 4,000 cases. On July 22, FDA announced second investigation which is still going on and no confirmed source has been identified. So Cyclospora is not just in the USA. It has been reported from various countries across the globe. The numbers are higher in tropical and subtropical regions. Unfortunately, due to some financial constraints, not all countries conduct surveillance to identify the pathogen. For example, here you can see lots of gray areas. That doesn't mean that they are negative. It means that Cyclospora was not detected here or there was no reports of Cyclospora from these regions. The more cases in the USA and Canada could be due to the better surveillance and reporting system. However, if we look at the numbers of Cyclospora cases in the last 35 years, that means since it was first reported in the USA, the numbers are not really bad. You can see here that historically there were 3 peaks in the burden of Cyclospora over this period. The first unusual peak was observed during 1996-1997, then in 2005, and the latest peak was between 2017 and 2022. Rest of the years are pretty much fine and there is no unusual rise in the cases. Now compared to these previous outbreaks, the current numbers are almost double and they are still rising. So historically, this is the biggest outbreak of Cyclospora in US history. The important question here to ask is, what is Cyclospora? So Cyclospora is a single cell protozoan parasite. It is very small, too small to be seen with naked eye. It measures only 8 to 10 micron in diameter. The species infecting humans is Cyclospora cayetanensis. Cyclospora is very complex pathogen compared to E. coli and Salmonella. It is known as very notorious and stubborn pathogen and it is very difficult to grow outside the host body. So researchers are still working on its biological properties, transmission pathways and pathogenesis, and there are many questions related to these attributes which are still unanswered, and we don't know much about this pathogen. So morphologically, it has spherical oocysts that are 8 to 10 micron in diameter. One oocyst contains two sporocysts, and each sporocyst contains two sporozoites. So it infects and lives out its life cycle inside the epithelial cells of the host in the gastrointestinal tract. The only host known for this parasite is humans. The life cycle of Cyclospora starts when an infectious oocyst enters the host body and reaches the small intestine. It invades the mucosa where it incubate for about 1 week and cause inflammation. So due to that inflammation, diarrhea occurs. After invading the host cells, it divides and forms new progeny, which is passed in the stool. The oocysts that are passed in the stool are not immediately infectious. So this is very important. So when this parasite leaves the human body and enters the environment, it is not infectious, and sporulation can take from 1 week to several weeks. That means new host will get infection via contaminated food and water carrying the infectious form of oocyst. This implies that person-to-person transmission is very unlikely because it requires a lag period between 7 to 14 days outside the host body to mature into infectious form. So your family member cannot directly infect you because when they pass in the pathogen in the stool, it is not infectious. So although advocacy of hand washing is generally good, it is not very helpful in containing the spread of this peculiar parasite. The incubation period is important here if you want to track the infection. The infection begins when a person ingests food or water that are contaminated with human feces, positive for Cyclospora. The typical time it takes from consumption to active disease is about 2 days to 14 days. The next question is, what is the route of transmission? So the route of transmission of Cyclospora is fecal-oral route, but it is not directly from human to human or household surfaces. Rather, it is indirect via contaminated food. As I told you earlier, that an infected person will pass new oocyst in the stool, which will contaminate the food and water, and it will take over 2 weeks to mature here in this environment. And when the new person will ingest this contaminated food and water, the cycle will restart. Incubation period runs up to 2 weeks. It will take 2 to 14 days for the infection to cause inflammation, and then the person will show the clinical sign, and after 14 days the person will seek medical attention, and if it is untreated it can cause relapse, and the person will experience intermittent diarrhea for 2 to 3 weeks. So if untreated, this could be very uncomfortable for the person. It's not a deadly disease. It will not cause deaths, but it can cause very severe dehydration, weight loss, and other signs which are very uncomfortable for the person. Why it is difficult to find the source of infection? So incubation period, as you know, that it runs up to 2 weeks. Add a few days before someone sees a doctor, plus 2 to 4 days for lab confirmation. Roughly 6 weeks pass between infection and case appearing in CDC data. In the meantime, the suspect salad was eaten or thrown out long ago. There is nothing left to test. To trace back the source, it's important to test both patient samples and the food they ate, which could be source of infection. In Cyclospora, due to this lag time between infection and appearance of symptoms up to the lab confirmation in patients, the source of infection or contaminated food is rarely available for testing. Hence, you cannot establish the laboratory confirmed link between the pathogen in the humans and the food source. That's why outbreak investigations are usually complex and result in unknown or undetermined results. Other hurdle is the recall bias. For example, you hardly remember what you ate 2 weeks ago. So it is difficult for epidemiologists to remove the recall bias from data. They have to rely on the data provided by the patients, which is usually hard to verify. People can list a number of food items they eat in last week, but investigators could not trace the pathogen in those items because most of those items are already gone, thrown away, or consumed. Other important thing is that the parasite cannot grow outside the human body like other pathogens, for example E. coli and Salmonella. It requires human host to grow. So that's why there are no animal model available to grow this parasite. So in vitro growth is very hard. The only quick method to test is PCR, but for that you need sufficient DNA of the parasite inside the food, sewage, or human feces, which is rarely possible to collect. So what are the sources of infection? The common food to harbor Cyclospora are leafy greens and fruits, for example raspberries or blueberries, strawberries, and other herbs including basil and cilantro. Water could also be the source of infection, so lakes, ponds, even swimming pool could be the source. So drinking water could also be contaminated when there is possibility of mixing with sewage or stool from infected person. The parasite can reside there for several weeks before ingestion by the new host. So irrigation water could also contaminate fresh produce. That's why usually these raw and fresh produce are source of infection. So why washing does not save you? Cyclospora is very tiny and sticky and hard to remove. It will stick to the crevices and grooves of fresh vegetable or fruits like raspberries. The oocysts have a very sticky outer layer that helps them cling tightly to rough surfaces like leafy greens. The outer wall is very hard and water cannot break it. Even chlorinated water cannot destroy it. So washing is good, but it would not save you from Cyclospora. So what are the symptoms? The main symptom is watery diarrhea, sometimes severe and described as explosive diarrhea. Other symptoms includes abdominal pain and stomach cramps, nausea or loss of appetite due to dehydration, and symptoms may last from several days to weeks and can sometimes recur. The next important thing is how it is treated. The first line and most commonly used treatment is trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, also known as Bactrim, plus supportive care, which includes oral rehydration to prevent dehydration. Best practice is to avoid consumption of raw and fresh produce from contaminated premises. So here are few over-the-counter medication for diarrhea which could help during the course of infection. So how to prevent cyclosporiasis? The only way to prevent cyclosporiasis is to avoid consuming contaminated food or water. So the best practice is to wash your hand before preparing the food and after preparing it. Also, routine washing practices should be observed. Thoroughly rinse fresh fruits and vegetables under running water. Scrub from produce when possible. This will lower the risk but will not completely eliminate it. The only way to kill Cyclospora is by cooking it to 70 degrees Celsius. Drink safe and treated water. Keep your kitchen clean, including tops and utensils, and know when to seek help. What should you do if you think you have cyclosporiasis? So the first important thing is to call your doctor. If you have persistent diarrhea, your doctor may order a stool test to check for Cyclospora. If the infection is confirmed, it can usually be treated with prescribed antibiotics. The next important step is to stay hydrated. Drink plenty of water and electrolyte-rich fluids to replace lost fluids. Avoid alcohol and caffeinated drinks, which can worsen the dehydration. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you got some important information from this video. If you like it, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.